Hi, my name is Ellie McDonald, and today I'm going to be talking about the role of emotion on autobiographical forms of memory, specifically an analysis on flashbulb and traumatic memories. So to start, what is an autobiographical memory? This is one's personal recollection of their experiences and episodes in their life. Now, emotion plays a prime role in autobiographical forms of memory. So emotion, as humans are highly emotional beings, we tend to think about our emotions on a daily basis. This occurs through personal significance of emotions in one's life. This specifically through repetition of our emotions and our emotional experiences. This leads to reinforcement of the experiences in our brain, and we'll talk about that later with the amygdala and the hippocampus's functions. However, these emotional recalls can also lead to inaccuracies in our memory, and this occurs through flashbulb and traumatic memories. So emotions, although they can help us in our memory recall, especially in helping it lead to long-term memories, they can also not help in inaccuracies and selective, distorted, and overall just inaccurate memory recall. The first thing we're going to talk about is the role of emotion in memory processing. So the amygdala is essentially where our emotional processing is occurring, and then the amygdala produces the emotional processes and leads these emotional processes to different brain functions, and one of these main brain functions is the hippocampus. So our hippocampus is what helps with long-term memory, specifically the transfer from short-term memory to long-term memory. Specifically, this long-term memory is supposed to be sequential and chronological and just accurate. However, this often doesn't occur. So, how does this not occur? One of the reasons for this is a flashbulb memory. This is one of the autobiographical forms of memory. So, for instance, a flashbulb memory, we'll use the example of a 9/11 study on flashbulb memories. So, in Hurst et al.'s long-term memory for the terrorist attacks of September 11th, flashbulb memories, event memories, and the factors that influence their retention, it showed that 9/11 often, when recalled, memory blending tended to occur, and this led to inaccuracies in people's personal recall of what actually happened to them. So I'll use an example. Imagine my parents when they're recalling 9/11 to my friend Melina's parents. Oftentimes, this social discussion will lead to memory blending of the two parents' accounts, and thus my parents might start to believe that what happened to Melina's parents occurred to them, and obviously it didn't. Another reason for errors in flashbulb memories is the high emotional arousal factor. So for highly emotional events such as flashbulb memories, oftentimes our emotions are overpowering our logic. So whenever our amygdala is kind of on fire and just these emotions are heightened, a lot of times it overrides. Since it's not working correctly, it starts to lead to inaccuracies, because if one brain function isn't working correctly, another one won't work correctly. So thus the transfer from the emotional processes to the hippocampus won't work correctly. So the hippocampus, instead of these accurate memory recalls from short-term to long-term memory, the chronological, the just regular what's supposed to happen, it won't be accurate. Instead, we'll remember just things that aren't right. Our emotions will be overriding these accuracies that are supposed to occur in our hippocampus, and thus emotions, whenever they're heightened and they're not normal, it can lead to inaccuracies in memory recall. Our next negative consequences of certain aspects of chronological memories is traumatic memory. So traumatic memories, one study we'll talk about is the Folk and Fissler dissociation and the fragmentary nature of traumatic memories, overview and an exploratory study. So this essentially talked about whenever individuals have experienced a traumatic event, this will happen, and then they'll have this traumatic memory. However, since our amygdala, these heightened emotions, are on fire, this will lead to inaccuracies in the hippocampus with our chronological sequential memories, and oftentimes they'll be fragmented, distorted, and just not accurate. So what can happen with these distorted memories? So one negative consequences of these inaccuracies in traumatic memories are dissociation. So dissociation occurs whenever one is experiencing a traumatic event, and in order to help them just cope with this in the moment, they will turn off parts of their consciousness in their brain, and they will not feel or see and just overall protect their body from what's happening to them. And so this will lead to dissociation. And another negative consequence of a traumatic memory is hyperactivity. So hyperactivity occurs whenever our adrenaline and our cortisol is severely up there. This is a naturally occurring survival instinct. And whenever this is still occurring, we're in constant fight or flight. This will lead to us still being like this after a traumatic event occurs, so our body will still think we're in a traumatic event, and thus this will lead to a regular nervous system, hypervigilance, constantly being aware of everything, just lots of stress. And even though we're not, experiencing a traumatic event, we'll still think we are. So, traumatic events also can lead people to, whenever they remember their traumatic event, like a flashback, for instance, in PTSD, since their amygdala was heightened, they will think of this in their hippocampus for their long-term memory, and they'll have a flashback into what happened. And there can be certain triggers too, like we see with people who were in the army with certain noises and stuff like that. That's a flashback. But whenever this flashback occurs, because these emotions were very high up there, they'll experience these emotions. They'll be very vivid sensory aspects, just certain emotions, things like that will override their logic. So that's why guilt and just shame and stuff like that will occur, because they won't people who experience a traumatic event will not remember the rationality behind that, and instead of the emotions that occurred during that. That's why their emotions tend to override their logic. So, in conclusion, emotion plays a pivotal role in memory recall. So emotions, as they help in the long-term memory process from the amygdala to the transfer of these emotional processes to the short-term to the long-term component of the memory in the hippocampus, this is highly beneficial because it helps. Emotion, as shown, tends to help in the memory recall process to long-term memory, and this can be, usually it's supposed to be accurate. However, we often see through aspects we just talked about, through flashbulb and traumatic memories, they can lead to inaccuracies as well. So what can we do to fix this? So individuals, for flashbulb memories, therapists, they can help people who have experienced a flashbulb event reframe and reconstruct these memory errors in a safe environment. So that will be the best way to help people who experience a flashbulb memory. And for individuals with traumatic memories, what can we do to help them? So, one, if they experience dissociation, therapists can use eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, known as EMDR. And for hyperactivity, they can use somatic experiencing to help them through that. And regarding memory errors, therapists can also help people experience a traumatic event through that. So they can use psychoeducation to help normalize these memory errors and help them know that this occurs naturally and the science kind of behind it. They can use grounding techniques to help people, especially who have experienced dissociation, just whenever they're recalling their traumatic event, imagine they start to dissociate. So instead, when this happens, therapists can help ground them back into reality through talking through what they're feeling, seeing, sensing, like the 5 senses. So that's very helpful as well. And one of the most, I would say, helpful ones personally is probably narrative therapy, specifically narrative exposure therapy and NET. So creating a narrative will help individuals who experience a traumatic event, because usually, like we talked about, their hippocampus does not have these chronological sequential memories. They're fragmented, they're selective, they're just inaccurate. So creating a narrative for people who experience a traumatic event will help them overall know and find hope in knowing that they know what happened to them, and they can just feel a little less crazy if they're feeling that way, and they can just know, I know what happened to me now, and they can find healing because they express the narrative of what occurred to them. So overall, emotion plays a prime factor in memory recall, and the next time you're thinking about your emotional events that happened in your life, you can be aware that, one, they can help you in your memory recall, And 2, if you experience a flashbulb or traumatic event, you can be aware that these emotions may not be accurate, and they can play a prime factor in affecting your present state, because you might become affected by these emotions from the past, and they might turn to these emotions that you're experiencing in the present, and they might not be accurate. So just keep that into consideration if one has experienced that. And overall, thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.